All right, here we are. So, this live, I'm going to start out a little bit differently. Last reading, there was a lot of new terms and it was very confusing. So, this time, I'm going to review and I'm going to go over some notes here. Sir. All right. So I'm just going to flip this around, actually, if I can figure out how. Flip camera. All right. Let's see. All right, so the confusing things were fauna, phala, and baka. So fauna is where, and these are just some notes I took on it. Fauna is the limited ego, is where the limited ego, mind, energy, and body vanishes. It's where consciousness is fixed and focused on an absolute vacuum, but it's a divine vacuum. It's not illusion, it's reality. So up until this point, everything has been illusion, but now we've hit reality, but it's a complete vacuum, and there's nothing there. But you are still experiencing it because you are consciousness itself, but you're experiencing nothing. And then, so we have nirvana. It's literally nirvana. That's what this is, and it's the first half of. Sorry, it's so shaky. It's the first half of. What's up, Sky? How's it going? I'm gonna start over for you since you're here now. So, yay. All right, so I'm gonna jump right into this because I've already kind of started for the YouTube video, but I'm just gonna start over real quick. Now that you're here, so the terms that I was hung up on last time were fauna, right here, and phala, right there, and then baka. So I've taken notes on them, and fauna is where the limited ego, your ego vanishes. There's nothing that you finally hit reality, and everything before it was not real, and now, but you're it's like a vacuum state, and there's nothing in it, but your consciousness is aware of it. So, and then it's literally nirvana. It's the same exact thing as nirvana, and what Buddha talked about was that God is not, and that got kind of misinterpreted. Whereas like there is no God, but really you are the consciousness experiencing God is not. So I don't know if that makes sense. But yeah, so there's no more reincarnation at this point. It's the absence of nothing and everything. So it's after nothing and before everything. So, and nothing literally means everything that we've experienced so far on this journey. So the false reality is literally nothing. So that vacant dream, that's what it's referring to. It's after that vanishes and you're in a vacuum state, and then that's before everything, which is like this phala part over here. So what else did I write? So it is just like falling asleep, and then waking up would be the phala part. It's the second half. Super consciousness experiences God is not in a vacuum state. Yeah, okay. So once you experience nothing, it's like falling asleep, and then waking up is experiencing everything, and you're aware of literally everything. So the Fana Falah is that second half of this stage, the seventh plane. And where we're at on our journey is we've already, our consciousness has evolved all the way into a human form, and then it's involved all the way, and we're at this last step of that involution process. So the false ego is replaced by a real, infinite, unlimited ego, where you realize that you are God and everything is actually real at that point. Or I don't know if everything is real, but you're aware of everything that is real and not real. So the vacuum is filled by the experience of the everything. Attainment of nirvikalpa samadhi. So that's like, so if this is nirvana, the vacuum is nirvana, the everything is nirvikalpa samadhi. So undoubtedly, I am God. Fana is like falling asleep. Fana Falah is like waking up. The Atma consciously merges with Paramatma. So the soul consciously merges with the Oversoul. God realizes that he exists eternally in infinite bliss. So that was that part. It's the end of the first divine journey and the beginning, that began in gnosis and ends in deification. And the happiness of God realization is the goal of all creation. I had to throw that part in. So yeah, the entire meaning of life is the happiness of God realization, and it makes all the suffering worthwhile, is what it says. And so Baka is where, so you've just realized that you're God, but Baka is where you kind of step into the life of God. And apparently there is, it's like your second divine path. So yeah, hopefully that clears up some of the stuff. And I kind of wanted to reread, if you don't mind, some of what I read yesterday with that in mind, and now that we can kind of make sense of it. Should I reread it or should I just keep going? Because I feel like it'll make a lot more sense now. There we go. I'll let you decide if you want. Otherwise, I'm just going to start rereading. Not all of it, but just the end. The end of that part. After I sip some tea. Down for reading, cool. Yeah, it didn't make any sense to me. So, but now I think it'll make sense. Oh, and there's a supplement as well in the back of the book that kind of explains it too. So I'll start with that. And between that and the notes, I think we'll have a pretty good grasp of what the heck is going on. Yeah, so good. I should have probably marked it. Oh, I think I did mark it. Oh, I did. How smart of me. All right. I got my cool bookmark. Pow. Yes, we're figuring this out. All right. So, the Sufi conception of Fana and Baka. This is a short study of the terms Fana and Baka as understood. So this is the supplement in the back of the book. This is a short study of the terms Fana and Baka as understood by the Sufis. Every plane has a Fana and Baka of its own. It must be remembered that the Fana of the planes is not the Fana of the seventh plane, and that the Baka of the planes is not the Baka of the Kutub state, the state of perfection. So one thing about Baka is there's like different references to it. So mainly it's talking about the seventh plane, but it can also mean something about like a sleep state or something else too. So I'm still not totally there yet, but I'll keep reading. The following are some of the chief points of comparison in Sufi gnosis, and it will be seen that their exposition is mostly in relation to the seventh plane, and that their terms have, of course, a transcendental application. Fana literally means effacement or annihilation. It is a state that is not permanent. Baka literally means permanence and is a state that abides forever. Fana signifies the end of traveling towards God. Baka signifies the beginning of traveling in God. So, yeah, okay, I'll keep going. Fana is not to be considered as an attribute. It is not like the dissolution of sugar and water. According to Hujwiri, it does not signify the disappearance of essence. Baka represents that which was not non-existent before and will not be non-existent afterwards, like the essence of God. I don't know what that means. Fana is the disappearance of the cognition of Ger, the other duality. So it's the end of duality. And finally, we've hit unity at this point. Baka is the knowledge of God that one gains after the disappearance of Ger. Ghair is that word. Fana, according to Mahmud Shabistari, in something, is death of passion, of self-will, and of the ego, resulting in the spiritual awakening to eternal life, Baka. So Baka is eternal life. Huh? It also means the forgetfulness of the false ego, Kudi, which has so long been concealing man's reality, God, from himself. If it occurs to the aspirant that he is effaced from self, it is a defect. The highest state is to be effaced from effacement. Fana is of two kinds, outward and inward. So outward fana, this is the fana of deeds and the glory of divine deeds. The possessor of this fana becomes so immersed in divine deeds that he is oblivious of himself and of everything except for the desire and the will of God. Some holy aspirants have attained this mukum, wherein they are so indifferent to physical needs that God appoints someone to look after them. And then inward fana, this is the fana of qualities in reality. The possessor of experience in the revelation of the attributes of God is immersed sometimes in the fana of his own qualities and sometimes in the manifestation of the influence and the glory of God. Outward fana is a portion of the lords of the heart and of the companions of Hall. I don't know what that means. Inward fana is peculiar to the noble ones who have outgrown the sway of Hall and have pierced the veil of the heart. And from the society of the men of the heart, they have joined the society of the converter of hearts, God. Baka, that is in relation to outward fana, is this. After fana of desire and of will, God makes the slave into a master of desire and will, and it gives him absolute control of the reins of guidance. Baka, in relation to inward fana, is this. The soul becomes neither God as the veil of creation, nor creation the veil of God. In fana, God is the veil of creation, and to those who have not reached the state of fana, creation is the veil of God. So, yeah, basically, that, I don't know if that really cleared anything up, but basically, just to recap, on the seventh plane, well, also, before I say that, there's also this experience of God, they call it a majzubi or something like that, where you're just like totally blissed out in this God state. And I imagine that's what like people that are like meditating in a cave for years and years and like don't eat or sleep or anything are experiencing. Whereas this is more of a sustained state. The baka is like, okay, so we hit the seventh plane. Fauna, we have this just absolute void. Our ego is gone. The false ego is gone. Just experiencing nothingness. And then we have the fauna phala is the second half of the seventh plane, where we, it's where we start acting as God. And then baka is like where we actually come back as a man or a human, but with God's consciousness. So that's what like Jesus and all of those guys are doing. Jesus and Buddha and Allah and Muhammad and whoever else I'm missing, Meher Baba. So yeah, okay, cool. Now I'm gonna go back to the part that makes a little bit more sense. So, all right, simultaneously with the complete involution of consciousness and on gaining superconsciousness, the mind is finally completely annihilated and vanishes once and for all time together with all impressions. The false experiences of the limited ego or I, mind, energy, body, and the world all disappear forever, vanishing completely because all these experiences were but the outcome of the impressions generated out of nothing, which literally meant nothing and were nothing. And by nothing, they're referring to everything, because everything is but a vacant dream of God, basically. Hey Debbie, how's it going? Consequently, with the vanishing of the limited ego or I, mind, energy, body, typifying happiness, and worlds with all of their corresponding paraphernalia, a state of absolute vacuum is spontaneously experienced by the consciousness, which remains eternally once it is gained. At this stage, God in the man state as man with full consciousness as superconsciousness is now only conscious of absolute vacuum. The consciousness is now fixed and focused on absolute vacuum itself. The vacuum is absolute in its eternity. Vacuum alone prevails, and there is an entire absence of the nothing as well as of the everything. This is therefore called the divine absolute vacuum, and it is not born of illusion, but it is born of reality. This state of divine vacuum prevails just as the instant when the nothing disappears or vanishes, and just immediately before the everything fills in the vacuum to give conscious experience of the reality of the I am God state. This is the first stage of fauna, where all that is of the nothing vanishes completely, and where the super consciousness is focused only on absolute vacuum, which now prevails as it prevails eternally in the original God is state of God in original divine sound sleep. So yeah, now hopefully that's making more sense. It's like, it's just for those just joining us, we have evolved our consciousness from gnosis. We had this urge, and we asked the question, who am I? And this urge had us evolve our consciousness all the way from gaseous forms into rocks, into plants, into animals, and it peaked at human. And that was where that process was complete. And then we started this process of involution, of returning to God, and there's 7 planes of it. And now we're on the 7th plane is what we're talking about. And the first half of that plane is called fauna. So the fauna is what we're talking about right now. It's a vacuum, and there's nothing there. And then the second half is the Fana Fala, where everything is experienced by the real ego, not the false ego, but the reality that you are God. All right, therefore, in the first state of Fana, the consciousness of God in the man state as man is not of the limited self or ego or I, mind, energy, body, and worlds, nor is the consciousness even of God or of the unlimited self or ego or I, universal mind, unbounded energy, universal body, and universes, because in this first stage of Fana, only the consciousness of absolute vacuum prevails. This vacuum is also divine. It is not of illusion, but it is of reality. In this first stage of Fana, the super consciousness of God in the man state as man experiences the passing away in the absolute vacuum state of the original God is state, and is thus conscious now only of absolute vacuum. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for the follow. I will continue. Feel free to... Oh, I'm glad this is clicking with you. Yeah, I'm kind of having the same experience. Yeah, if anyone has questions or wants to talk about it, I stop after every paragraph and read and check to see if there's any comments. As has already been said, this same absolute vacuum state is also established in everyday sound sleep state of a normal man, where the limited ego or I, mind, energy, body, and the worlds also vanish, and the consciousness gained remains dormant. The only difference, which truly makes a world of difference, between the absolute vacuum state of the everyday sound sleep state of man and the experience of the absolute vacuum in the first stage of Fana is that although the same absolute vacuum is established also in Fana, yet in Fana the consciousness no longer remains dormant. In this stage it is fully and completely matured consciousness, now actually experiencing the very same absolute vacuum state as the original state of God. So they're comparing the seventh plane as being the same. You kind of go to the same vacuum every time you fall asleep. And they talked about dreams earlier, but I don't remember exactly what they said. Anyway. It's exactly the same, except that now you are fully conscious of it, because we don't remember when we fall asleep and being in this original state of God. So, the experience of the first stage of Fana is of the nirvana state. Nirvana is the state where apparently God is not. This is the only state where God is not and consciousness is. This experience of the first stage of Fana is what Buddha emphasized, but later on it was misinterpreted as Buddha having emphasized that there was no God. The reality, however, is that God is, but in the absolute vacuum state of the first stage of Fana, only consciousness remains, experiencing absolute vacuum. As it can never happen for God not to exist, in the state of nirvana, God plays the part of consciousness itself, which consciousness is sometimes termed super consciousness or Mahachaitanya. Okay. Yeah. Super consciousness. So yeah, I love how it relates back to Buddha, and it's literally nirvana. The first half of the seventh plane is nirvana, and then the second half is like an even further goal past nirvana called nirvakalpa or nirvakalpa samadhi. The second stage of Fana follows this nirvana state, and the I am God state is experienced consciously. However, it is only in some cases that the first stage of Fana is immediately followed by the second stage of Fana called Fana Phala, where the annihilated false and limited ego or I is replaced by the real and infinite unlimited I, on which the super consciousness now becomes automatically focused. Simultaneously, the absolute vacuum is automatically filled by the experience of the infinite. The super, oh, hey, Butterfly, thanks for the gift, appreciate it. Let me make sure I didn't miss any comments, and I'll try not to invite people up. Okay, cool. The super consciousness of God in the man state as man, now fixed and focused on the unlimited I, spontaneously identifies man with God the infinite. Simultaneously with identification, the super consciousness of God the infinite experiences the I am God state. This is the goal. Attainment of the goal is to attain Nirvikalpa Samadhi. And there's a footnote here. The soul has necessarily to pass through the state of nirvana to attain liberation, mukti. Escape from the round of birth and death is attained both in nirvana and nirvikalpa. It is because of this that nirvana is supposed to be the goal, but the fact is that the real goal for one in human form is to attain nirvikalpa. And there is a world of difference between nirvana as goal and nirvikalpa as goal. So an interesting note here is that we are still in human form experiencing all of this. Just as man goes to sleep every night and must wake up every day in the state of man, so also when one goes into divine sleep, one must awake in the divine. Similarly, the stage of Fana is the sound sleep state with full consciousness, and the second stage of Fana, which is Fana Phala, is the state of awakening in God as God. When the first stage of Fana is immediately followed by the second stage of Fana Phala, in some cases the consciousness of this limited I, self, mind, energy, body, and the worlds does not come back, but the consciousness, now as super consciousness of the unlimited I, only exists as identified with the universal self God. The super consciousness now experiences the I am God, Aham Brahmasmi, or Analhak state. This is the experience of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, meaning thereby, undoubtedly I am God. This is experienced because in Fana Phala, the Atma, soul, consciously merges completely in Paramatma, or Oversoul. Or in Fana Phala, the soul achieves complete union with the Oversoul. So yeah. This experience is the goal, and it was attained only after the evolution of the consciousness latent in the nothing took place, when the latent finite nothing manifested as infinite nothingness. The evolved consciousness, while infinitely entangling itself in the field of nothingness, experienced this false and finite nothingness as real and infinite. Ultimately, when this consciousness involved, it could gradually experience the infinite falsity of the infinitely false nothingness, and eventually realize the infinite reality of the God, the infinite, as the everything beyond doubt and beyond limitations, and as eternal existence in the I am God state of Fana Phala. Is this making sense, you guys? Thanks for sharing. So yeah, basically what I just read meant that we had to create creation and then go through all of it to become fully conscious of the self as God. And then once we did that, our ego completely dissolved, and our new super ego, the real ego of being awareness of all that is replaces it. And at this point, we have infinite power, infinite knowledge, infinite bliss, and we have knowledge of just that whole process. Anyway, this Fana Phala, the second half of the seventh plane, is the goal where the I am God state is experienced. For example, by those persons who are called majzubs, one being overpowered by God or one whom God controls, these persons are also known as brahmibhuts. In this state, one constantly, continually, and consciously experiences the I am God state together with the continued and conscious experience of the infinite trio nature of God, infinite power, infinite knowledge, and infinite bliss, as one's own infinite nature. So it is the self-conscious God in the man state, as man in the seventh plane, is now fully conscious of self as infinite and eternal. He is now also conscious of the source of energy and mind, which were nothing but the finite aspects of his own infinite power and infinite knowledge, which he experiences now while being continually in infinite bliss. So it talks about majzubs. As I said earlier, I think that those are just people that are like blissed out meditating in a cave somewhere, and they're just completely just like one with God, but they haven't gone through all of this. They haven't experienced Fauna Fala exactly. It's a little bit different, but they're still experiencing that state, and then God's just kind of like channeling through them, basically. That's my impression of it. That might not be completely accurate. In his travail to gain self-consciousness, the indivisible, eternal God, unconscious of his infinite state, gathered and experienced innumerable diverse impressions, and all the while associated himself with the finite and ephemeral existences, unfurling the gross, subtle, and mental worlds while evolving gross consciousness of the gross world, gross meaning material, and while involving consciousness of the subtle and mental planes of the subtle and mental worlds, subtle meaning energy, mental meaning mind. The final involution of the consciousness of God culminated in consciousness realization of his self in his infinite state. And impressions, meaning that, like right now, we're under the impression that, oh, thank you for the gifts, I appreciate it. Impressions are like, what are our beliefs, as how I like to think of them. So like I'm under the belief that I'm a human right now, and that's why I'm a human. So once I shed that impression, then I'll be God, I guess, or whatever. Human's kind of the... Yeah, anyway, you get it. Oh, right. Consequently, when the consciousness of God gained consciousness of self and experienced infinite power, knowledge, and bliss, God realized that he exists eternally in infinite bliss, and that all through the travail of gaining self-consciousness, the impressions, experiences, and associations and dissociations of the gross, subtle, and mental bodies and worlds were of the nothing and were but vacant dreams. He realized, too, that the identification with gross bodies, creatures, and human beings and all experiences of the three worlds and the six planes with all their paraphernalia had their relative existences sustained and maintained as long as his consciousness was immature. Maturity was only attained in the seventh plane with consciousness fully involved. This led God to realize his self, or made God fully conscious of God realization. In other words, God's own infinite state was consciously realized by God himself when he attained the I am God state. Now I'm wondering how many times this has happened over history, because you can look at Jesus and Buddha and Allah and everybody as reaching this state and then actually going past it and coming back in human form after attaining all of this. So I'm wondering how many times this has happened. And also, I don't know if anyone here follows Bashar at all, but Bashar has his own version, and he's like, according to him, he's, an alien on some other planet, and they have their own people who have done this and achieved this. So I'm wondering how many times this has happened, how where a human has reached this part. Yeah, you're familiar. Cool. I'm pretty sure I've shared some videos with you on Bashar. I do like him. In other words, God first goes through the becoming process in the gross. That is, in the gross, God becomes the body of Ana Bhuvan, gross sphere. Then in the subtle, he becomes the energy of Pran Bhuvan, the subtle sphere. You don't have to know these words, it just means the material world or material sphere, the energetic sphere. And then in the mental, he becomes the mind of Mano Bhuvan, the mental sphere. Beyond this, in Vidyan, God becomes God, that which he was and is and always will be. Therefore, God, who was originally unconscious, now becomes oblivious of oblivion itself and gets the real and final answer to his original first word, who am I, as I am God. Thus, in the gross, subtle, and mental spheres, God becomes actually what he really is not. And in the Vidyan, he becomes actually what he really is. Originally, God was God. Now God has become God. So it's the difference of consciousness, I think, just being conscious of what you are after this whole process of evolution and involution. Just because God, after passing away in his original state of absolute vacuum in the first stage of Fana, realizes his own infinite state of I am God in the second stage of Fana, Fana Phala, becomes and is the goal. Attainment of this goal means the end of the first divine journey, which began with gnosis and which ended after traversing all planes of consciousness in deification. So yeah, we started out in gnosis, meaning we're still God, but we're not conscious of it, and we ended up in deification, where we become a deity. The second stage of Fana is deification, which means man has become God. Man now is God and experiences God's knowledge, God's powers, and God's bliss, but this is not perfection as yet, although it is the goal. At the second stage of Fana, or the Fana Phala, which is the end of the first divine journey, man has entered God and thus has become God, but has not yet entered God's life. Man, at the end of the first divine journey, simply realizes that he is God and simply experiences the I am God state together with the experiences of infinite power, knowledge, and bliss, and enjoys the state of infinite bliss. So yeah, that they just mentioned that there's a first divine journey, which means that there's probably a second divine journey, which is where you go from learning who you are to actually doing things as who you are, if that makes sense. After the goal is attained at the end of the first divine journey, but very rarely, however, God as man, now in the God state, can leave infinite bliss and come down to normal consciousness from the superconscious I am God state and begin to experience the state of Baka, thus entering the second divine journey. The Sufi term Baka, B-A-Q-A, means abiding in. The dude abides. To come down to normal consciousness from the superconsciousness, I am God state, and to experience the abiding in God state would mean getting established in the very life of God. Thus, in Baka, the life of God in a human being is established. This means that in Baka, man establishes himself as God consciously. This consciousness is called Sulukiyat, or the normal consciousness of being established in the life of God. Distinct from this is the Majzubiat, or being drowned or absorbed by infinite bliss in the state of I am God. Accordingly, God as man experiencing the state of Baka is called the real Salik in Sufi terminology. The Baka of reality and divinity is called Baka Bala. In Vedanta, it is known as Atma Pratistapana. That's a really long word. So yeah, I still don't completely understand what a Majzubiat is, but it says it is being drowned or absorbed by infinite bliss. So I don't know what stage of the process of involution that person would be on, but apparently it's different than like God coming back into a man's body, like Jesus or all this Muhammad, Buddha, Meher Ila Ilahi Yezden Ahura Mazda, or God the Beloved. The Salik not only experiences infinite power and infinite knowledge while in infinite bliss, as in Majzubiat, but now being the Salik, he consciously accumulates all the infinite power, infinite knowledge, and infinite bliss while being established in the life of God with the normal consciousness of his Sulukiyat. So a Salik, I wrote this down somewhere. It's basically, I don't see where I wrote it though. Oh, here it is. Yeah, okay, so a Salik is what I just said, the man, the God coming back as a man. You're a Salik, that's what that person is called. So God in human form is a Salik. And then a Sulukiyat is the consciousness of that, I believe. I could be wrong on that part, but definitely got the Salik part right. All right, but before finally and really passing away in the reality of the ultimate Fana Phala state with full consciousness completely matured, and before getting established in the final Baka Bala of divinity. So the Baka Bala, I believe, is the end of, I looked this one up, it's the end of the second divine journey. So the first divine journey was the evolution of consciousness up to a point where you become human, and then the involution of consciousness where you realize you're God, and then you start your second divine journey. Thank you for the gifts, Crystal. Thanks for being here. I appreciate it. So the Baka Bala is like the last step in the second divine journey, I believe. So nevertheless, 3, you guys are awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks for the likes and everything. Nevertheless, 3 fundamental types of Fana Baka include all the, and Fana Baka is, so Fana is like where you fall asleep and Baka is where you wake up. And in this case, it's where you fall asleep, like where your ego completely dies forever, and you've kind of experienced the vacuum of nothingness. And then Baka is where you kind of reemerge as the real ego, which is being one with everything, or God. So that's what Fana Baka means. It's like this process, and I believe, I could be wrong about this, but there are like multiple Fana Bakas that you experience, like a lot of them. And then the Baka Bala would be the last one. All right, so I'll get back to the reading. The first of the 3 fundamental types is the rudimentary. This type is the Fana Baka of the phenomenal false life and illusion experienced by all who daily, passing away in Fana, gain Baka to abide in illusion every day. This rudimentary Fana Baka of the ordinary phenomenal false self is composed of the ordinary sound sleep state and the ordinary awake state. So this term also applies to, like, literally when we fall asleep at night and wake up. I wonder if Baka is kind of like you become lucid. It's like a lucid dream or something like that. That's what I'm wondering. I don't know. As stated before, even when one with all the impressions of illusion passes away in sound sleep, the same original divine absolute vacuum of the God is state is established, where never anything existed and where nothing ever existed except the one infinite and only reality as the everything, which is called the infinitude of God in his God is state. When the impressions of illusion with which one goes to sleep wake one up, one abides in illusion itself in the awake state and establishes everyday life in illusion. Accordingly, in everyday life, when one goes into sound sleep, Fana is established as one daily passes away in the original God state without consciousness. And when one wakes up daily, Baka is gained to abide in the everyday life of illusion. As long as sound sleep does not overpower and drag one once again into the state of the daily Fana, which is one's original divine state of absolute vacuum. This second type of Fana Baka is of the planes on the path towards attainment of the goal and differs from the rudimentary type of the ordinary phenomenal false life in illusion, although this second type of Fana Baka of the planes is also illusion. In every plane, from the first through the sixth plane on the path, the full consciousness evolved is being gradually withdrawn inwards or involved. Hence, the Fana Baka of the planes is in accordance with the impressions impregnating the involving consciousness and differs from the type of rudimentary Fana Baka of the impression consciousness that is fully evolved or is still in the process of evolution. So these terms, Fana and Baka, also apply to each of the 6 planes, but it's not like, but when you get to the 7th one, then it becomes real. And there's, that never changes once you hit that. There's no more illusion. I mean, you still, once you get the second half of the 7th plane, then you are aware of illusion, but you know it as illusion. Crazy. All right. Every plane on the path towards the goal of Fana Fala has its Fana Baka, while the fully evolved, it's like the last step, I guess, fully evolved conscious is being gradually involved in conjunction with progressive advancement in the planes. But the generalizing meaning of the Sufi term Fana is the passing away in, that part's in quotes, passing away in, the absolute vacuum of the original God is state. Therefore, whether the Fana is of the rudimentary type of the ordinary phenomenal false life, of the second type of the planes on the path, it does not make any difference at all. In both types, the Fana, passing away in, is fundamentally the same. For daily, in sound sleep state, the impression consciousness in both cases passes away in the same state of absolute vacuum, regardless of all the differences in the types of impressions of illusion. I'm starting to be more grateful for how repetitive it is, so that we can understand it a little bit better with each repetition, because it's going to take all of them. Although the Fana is always the same in both the evolving consciousness and the involving consciousness, yet it is the type of impressions of illusion with which the consciousness is impregnated while abiding in illusion during the awake state that really matters, and that does create the differentiation when passing away in the sound sleep state or in the state of Fana. For example, the Fana of an animal or a creature in the sound sleep state passing away in the absolute vacuum with its own particular impressions of illusion differs completely from the fauna of a human being in the sound sleep state passing away in. The absolute vacuum with his own particular impressions of illusion. Similarly, the impressions of illusion of an ordinary human being will be quite different from the impressions of illusion of a human being on the planes of the path. So, if you're just joining us, fauna means basically falling asleep, and then we're in the state of the seventh plane where you achieve God realization, you experience a vacuum, and then you have this other stage of fauna phala where you realize everything at once. So that's what fauna means, and fauna phala. And then baka is like your second divine journey after you've attained God realization. To put it in very short terms, because I've been repeating this a lot. So, in all cases, though the different types of fauna remain always as fauna, yet the different impressions impregnating individual consciousness in the baka of the awake state give rise to the individualized fauna of each and all species and states of life in creation. Okay, says though the different types of fauna remain always as fauna, yet the different impressions impregnating individual consciousness in the baka of the awake state give rise to the individualized fauna of each and all species and states of life in creation. Okay, so every species has their own kind of experience like this constantly. In contrast with that, when the baka of the individualized life is gained in the awake state after the sound sleep state of fauna, the baka, which in Sufi terms means abiding in, establishes in illusion the everyday individualized life of illusion in accordance with the predominant impressions with which the individualized life had passed away from the variety of impressions of illusion in the state of its individualized fauna, in the sound sleep state. As such, this part's getting pretty grindy. As such, every individualized baka completely differs from every other baka, because when this individualized baka is gained in the awake state, the impressions of impressioned consciousness of every individualized life are solely responsible for establishing in illusion the individualized life of illusion. So baka, in the way I'm understanding it, is kind of like a lucid dream. It's where you just become lucid, kind of. Hence, it is that in regular unfailing succession, the fauna of illusion in the sound sleep state is invariably followed by the baka of illusion in the awake state, which in turn gets lost in the inevitable fauna only to alternate and re-establish again and again, day after day, year after year, and life after life, irrespective of whether this fauna or baka is of the ordinary phenomenal false life or is of the planes on the path. It is never stable as long as it is of the illusion. So just to recap on that a little bit, there's like 3 different fauna baka relationships. One is where you just fall asleep every night, you experience fauna, everything disappears, there's a vacuum, and then baka is like waking up, I guess. And then there's also, so we talked about the evolution of consciousness up to the state where you're a human, and that's where that is complete. And then you evolve through 7 planes to God realization. And on each of those planes, you have a fauna baka. So it's kind of like it's like an ego death, basically. And then baka is like you become lucid and you realize and you're on the next plane. And then you have the one on the 7th plane where that one's different because you actually experience reality. So you fall asleep, i.e. experience a vacuum, and then you wake up lucid as one with everything and you realize you're God. Yes, I'm reading about sleep. I hope it makes you sleepy. I hope you think about it when you fall asleep. All right, I need a sip of tea. Thank you for being here, everyone. Thanks for the likes and everything. Oh, good. I appreciate that very much. I don't know if I agree with you, but I do appreciate it. All right. As long as individualized life does not really and finally pass away, and I should get like a microphone, that would be a lot better. Anyway, as long as individualized life does not really and finally pass away in the Phanaful law of reality and become established in the abiding Baka-Bala of divinity, it is obvious that there are bound to be innumerable and diverse types and groups of Phana Baka of illusion in accordance with the persisting impressions that consistently impress the evolving and involving consciousness of individualized life in Baka. I may be wrong, but I think this is talking about the second divine path, which is after God realization and after the entire path. I could be wrong. In every plane also, from the first through the sixth plane of involving consciousness, there is bound to be a particular type of baka for each of the six planes in accordance with the particular impressions of the illusion of each plane. When a man is said to be on the first plane, his fully evolved consciousness, I should say, when a human is said to be on the first plane, their fully evolved consciousness is beginning to involve, and his full consciousness remains focused on the first plane of the subtle sphere being the energetic sphere. Because the impressions or beliefs of the first plane consistently impregnating his involving consciousness make him abide in the first plane and lead him to experience the illusion of this plane. Even though the gross body of the man on the first plane is exactly like the gross body of a man not on the first plane, and though the man on the first plane also sleeps and wakes up exactly like an ordinary man of the everyday phenomenal false life, yet because of his involving consciousness is directly focused on the first plane, he passes away in the sound sleep state of the first plane Phana with the impressions of the illusion of the first plane, and wakes up daily to get established in the first plane Baka, to abide in the first plane and to experience the impressions of that plane. So yeah, I'm starting to feel that Baka just means that, like, that's what you're experiencing. You're like, okay, well, I'm on the first plane now, Baka. And then, so like, if you're on the seventh plane, Baka would be self-realization or God realization, but actually abiding in it. So that's the key part of that phrase, is you kind of immerse yourself in that experience and start acting that way. Did you like that one? The difference between the Phana Baka of a man who enters the planes of the path and of the man who is not on the planes of the path is that the former can be likened to a man who, after living for many years in a certain place, severs all of his past connections and sets out on a world tour, traveling from one place to another, crossing continents one after another. Although this man would be daily going to sleep and awakening the next day, as he was accustomed to sleeping and awakening every day in his first habitat, yet now, in the course of his world tour, he would be passing away in sound sleep and would be daily waking up evidently with the predominant impressions of his completely changed environments and novel experiences. Ooh, there is a reference to the supplement. I'm going to check it out real quick and see if it's interesting. Let's see. Oh, you know what? I have to. It sends you on a treasure hunt. You have to find all these. Yeah, it sends you to like a table of contents somewhere. I can't find that. Okay. Maybe I'll talk about that next time. Anyway, in short, he who enters the first plane of involving consciousness eventually experiences the first plane fully. This man who is getting established in the first plane establishes his living in this world of his own, and therefore he sleeps in this plane and wakes up every day in this plane as well. In exactly the same way, all individualized consciousness in all other planes passes away in the fauna of those particular planes to wake up in such planes and establish the everyday life baka in those particular planes. And if you're just joining us, those planes are so you have the evolution of consciousness from where the soul evolves into human form, and then we start the process of involution where we to the point of God realization, and there are 7 planes on that journey. So that's what we're talking about. I hope that cleared it up. I know I could go deeper into that, but I've been saying it over and over, so I don't want to bore everyone. And if you have more questions or would like me to clarify, just please ask in the chat, and I'll be happy to elaborate on anything or any of these terms. Nevertheless, the fauna baka of every plane of the path is fundamentally of the same type because it pertains only to consciousness that is evolving gradually, and not to that of the evolving nor of the evolved consciousness. Whatever difference there is to differentiate the fauna baka of one plane from another plane would only be such as would exist between 2 men living on different continents of the same earth and having their own individualized impressions of that particular part of earth on which each lives. I feel like this analogy is kind of reaching. It's kind of hard to understand. The man in America has his own impressions and relative experiences of his individualized life. The same is true of the man in Asia, who has his own impressions and experiences related to his continent, which is quite different from America. Except the planes are, like, those people are equal, whereas the planes are all like a sequential journey. Thanks, Debbie. Ooh, I got a puzzle to do. It's a vase. Oh, I did it. All right. Okay. But the fundamental fact remains that both men live on the same earth, despite the vast difference between the impressions and the consequent experiences of these 2 men. Yet when both sleep, they both pass away, sound in sleep. And whether one sleeps on a bed of velvet and the other on a bed of hay, it is quite immaterial when both can equally enjoy the same sound sleep state. In like manner, when both wake up, they both can live their individualized lives in illusion on the same earth, irrespective of the difference in their impressions and their consequent relative experiences due to living on different continents. Thus, the fauna bakas of all the planes on the path are not in any way different fundamentally, although each and every plane on the path has its own fauna and baka when individualized life on the planes is under consideration. Just as the rudimentary first type of fauna and baka includes all the individualized fauna and bakas of dogs, horses, camels, elephants, of all creatures and human beings that live the phenomenal false life of illusion in the gross world, so also the second type of fauna and baka of the planes on the path include all the individualized fauna and bakas of each and all on every plane from the first through the 6th planes of the illusory, subtle, and mental worlds. So yeah, that was just saying that every being experiences falling asleep and waking up in illusion, and everything is illusion until you reach the seventh plane of consciousness, of God consciousness. When a man in a particular plane, with his consciousness gradually involving, becomes completely dazed by the enchanting experiences of the plane, the man is said to be a majzub of this particular plane. And there's a footnote here. The majzub and salik of the planes should not be confused with the real majzub of the seventh plane, known as majzub-i kamil, nor the real salik of the seventh plane. So as I keep reiterating, the seventh plane is reality, whereas the rest, everything else leading up to that we're experiencing, such as mind and energy and body, is all illusion. Such a majzub is completely absorbed and overpowered by the impressions of illusion. So a majzub is like, I don't know if this is right, but to me it sounds like a majzub is somebody that's like just mastered the plane they're on, and they're just like blissed out in the beauty of it. Whereas a salik is like mastered the plane, but instead of being infatuated by it, they're like just above it, and they're just like a master of that plane, basically. That's how I'm interpreting it. Don't quote me on that. Such a majzub is completely absorbed and overpowered by the impressions of illusion of the plane, which consistently impregnate his consciousness. Yeah, that's kind of what I said, right? Even in the awake state, this majzub of the planes behaves as if he were completely intoxicated by and drowned in the enchantment of the plane. Such a man is commonly known as a mast, M-A-S-T, meaning thereby that the man is God intoxicated. I feel like that's exactly what I said. Anyway, on the other hand, if a man in a particular plane does not get absorbed in and overpowered by the fascinating experiences of the plane, but continues to maintain his poise throughout, while his involving consciousness is persistently impressed by the impressions of the illusion of that plane, impressions meaning beliefs, he is then said to be a salik of the particular plane. Such a salik salik is like a master, to all external appearances behaves like a very normal man of the world, even though his consciousness is progressively involving and is completely dissociated from the gross world as far as his consciousness fully focused on the particular plane is concerned. The sulukiyat and masti of each plane are different. There are, however, certain cases when a man in a particular plane is sometimes completely drowned in and absorbed by the fascination of the experiences of the plane and behaves like a majzub, and at other times he regains his poise and behaves like an ordinary, normal salik of the plane. Such a man on the plane is said to be a majzub salik of the plane if the predominant behavior is that of a majzub, and a salik majzub of the plane if the predominant behavior is that of a salik. Such a state in illusion may be compared with the Turiya Avasta at the divine junction in reality. So yeah, we're talking about the planes of consciousness as our consciousness evolves into human form. It then involves through 7 planes. And this is talking about mastery of each plane, kind of, or people who are totally infatuated by the plane versus people who have kind of mastered it, or maybe not have to master it to be a sleek. I'm not sure about that. Anyway, the third type of Phana Bhaka, falling asleep and waking up, is of the 7th plane of the final involution of consciousness, and is the real Phana Phala of the reality and the real Bhaka Bala of the divinity. So the seventh plane is reality, where all the rest are not. When the impressioned consciousness of individualized life is totally and finally relieved of all impressions of the illusion, and when this unburdened or impressionless individualized self consciously passes away in the original divine absolute vacuum to gain the Fana Phala, or the I am God state, the goal is finally attained. This is the state of the real Majzubiyat. So, Fana means to experience a vacuum, but on the seventh plane specifically, it's a real vacuum. It's reality, but you're experiencing a vacuum. And then Fana Phala means you experience everything, and it all floods back in, and you become one with everything, or God realized. The only but infinite difference between the phanas of all the different individualized species and the states of illusory life and the final and real phana of the divine life is that in the former the consciousness is nil, while in the latter the full consciousness prevails. Check my time. I'm going to read for about 18 more minutes. After the state of Fana Phala, the state of Baka Bala is established by some individualized selves to live the life of God as man-God on the earth. Such a man-God lives at one and the same time in all states of life and in all planes. The life of man in illusion, knowing illusion as illusion, and of God in reality. So that's what Baka Bala means, perhaps. It's just, so Baka specifically is, oh no, that's a Salik. Okay. It is life of God. Yeah, it's basically after you've gone through this entire involution process and you've God realized, you can go back as a man. So that's what Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad, Allah, Meher Baba all did. And yeah, that's what that was talking about. They're experiencing non-reality as and they know it's not reality, but they're also experiencing all the other planes at once, and yeah, I guess everything all at once. After attaining the state of Fana Phala and before establishing the state of Baka Bala, there is also a state of Turiya Avasta at the divine junction between Fana Phala and Baka Bala. In this state, there is sometimes the experience of real Majzubiyat of the Fana Phala and sometimes the experience of real Sulukiyat of the Baka Bala. This is the state of the real Majzub Salik, or Salik Majzub, as the case may be. Majzub being intoxicated by God, Salik being not so much intoxicated, but all-knowing. I don't know if it's all-knowing, actually. Anyway, thanks for the likes. Appreciate it. The consciousness of the false limited I, which was there before Fana, matured through the process of involution, and the limited false I was replaced by the real unlimited I in Fana Phala. In Baka Bala, this matured consciousness is now focused once again and is fixed on the I as the real unlimited I, on the mind as universal mind, on energy as unbounded energy, and on the body as the universal body called the Mahakarana Sharir. An important fact must be noted here, that in the state of Baka Bala, simultaneously the same consciousness is also focused and fixed on the limited I, mind, energy, and body, wherefore the Salik consciously, the Salik being the God-conscious human, who has already finished the journey, experiences the false as falsity with the false, and the real as reality with the real. In case you didn't get that, the Let's see, the state of Bacabola, same consciousness, I guess. So you have, when you reach the seventh plane of involution, that says that the false ego dies, and then the real ego, which is the God realization, takes over. Because on the seventh plane, everything is real, and before that, everything is not real. Consequently, in God's state of Bacabola, God in human form, the same consciousness simultaneously experiences the dual experiences of I am God and I am human. Along with this dual experience, the same consciousness spontaneously also experiences without break the infinite knowledge, power, and bliss of God, along with the experiences of the weaknesses and sufferings of humanity. Yeah, so when you reach the seventh plane, you've experienced infinite bliss, and then, if you want, you come back as a human and experience suffering again. But it's said in here somewhere that it's totally worth it. The happiness that the happiness of God realization is the goal of all creation and makes all the suffering worthwhile. It follows that in God's state of Bacabola, God, in the form of an ordinary human being, establishes himself in his divine life, or a man abides in the life of God. In short, Bacabola is that state of God where abiding in, or getting established in God, is experienced by those who are defined as saliks, or jivanmuktas. And there's more on that, but I'm not going to find it right now. The salik continually and consciously experiences simultaneously the dual experience of the I am God state and I am human state, and accumulates infinite knowledge, power, and bliss simultaneously, experiencing human weakness and sufferings, knowing their falsity to be based on the manifestation of the finite nothing that manifests out of his own state of being everything and infinite. In Bacabola, or the life of God and human being established, let me start that sentence over. In Bacabola, the life of God and human being established, man as God experiences the Sahaj Samadhi. This means that man as God simultaneously, without the least effort, has continuously and automatically the dual experience of God and of man. This is the state of perfection. Wow. Oh, okay. Gotcha. They've been leading up to the state of perfection as a second divine journey after God realization. And then apparently in this state, God is experiencing duality and unity at the same time. Perfection generally carries with it the sense of the highest pitch of, or the extreme type of accomplishment, and perfection as such cannot become more perfect. But when the term perfection is used in terms of divinity, there are three types of perfection in the state of Sulukiyat of Bacabola, God in human form. The first type is known as Kamil, the perfect one. The second type is known as Akmal, the most perfect one. The third type is known as a Mukamil, the supremely perfect one. There's absolutely no difference whatsoever in their continual and conscious experience of the eternal reality, but the degrees of comparison that are attached to the perfection are due to the difference in the function of the offices of perfection. Hence, due to the differences in function, different attributes are attached to each type of perfection. The Camille, so there's the perfect one, the most perfect one, and the supremely perfect one as the three types. Check my time, 10 more minutes. The Camille can spontaneously give conscious experience of the realization of God to only one man and make only that man like unto him in the eternal experience of the reality. The Akmal can make many like unto him in experience, whereas the Mukamil can make not only any number, even all in the creation. And there's a footnote. And I have to pee because I drank all of this tea, so I'll see you in 1 minute. Or maybe I should end it, but I don't know. I'll be back in a sec. Okay, sorry about that. Oh, there's more people than when I left. Let's see. I might just stop there because I feel like that's a good stopping point. Because we've really dug into this whole fauna, phila, baka relationship. And now we're getting into to perfection. And I lost my page. There we go. Yeah, this is kind of like a new topic. And I think next time we'll finish this part 8. So yeah, I'm just gonna stop right there. Sky, you made it through this whole thing. I wasn't sure if you're still here or not. I appreciate you. You stuck around even though you're tired. Yeah, it was a lot better. It was the same thing that I read last. That's the same page that I stopped last night. But this time I feel like we really got a much better grasp on it because I figured out what all those words mean. So yeah, that was a lot better. And so I'll just post that one instead of the other one. Yeah, I did too. And I like being able to like say like in the moment like, oh, this means that or this means that, whereas last night I was just like, I have no idea what's going on. And I think it helps with like my cadence and everything. So thank you so much for staying. And since this book is by Meher Baba, what they call them Baba lovers would say is Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai. Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai. Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai. So yes, thank you again. Thank you Butterfly for sticking around. Thank you Toki. Hope you guys gained something from this. And I'll leave you with that. Good night, everyone.